everyone. Welcome back to the Command Your Brand Show. I'm your host, Josh Silvestro, brand ambassador of Command Your Brand, where we help CEOs and founders get on top-rated podcasts. Check us out at www.commandyourbrand.com. And if you guys like this stuff, please smash this like and subscribe to us, all right? That definitely helps the channel out. So in this episode, I have a very special speaker who I would love to talk to who, is in a lot of areas he's very expert in, you can say, who's dealt with a lot of, medical stuff. He's a doctor. He's had a lot of experience in work-life balance, and he's just kind of an all-around awesome dude. So I want to introduce you guys to Michael Biamonte. So Michael, thanks for joining the show, man.
Hey, thanks, Josh.
Yeah. So I guess what we'll first start off with, because I know you've been on the show before with Jeremy when Jeremy was the host. I guess, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and then also why you started what you started today?
Well, I'm a certified clinical nutritionist, New York State certified. I'm also a naturopathic doctor, but we don't have licensing for naturopaths in New York. And what I do is very similar to what a functional medical doctor does. As a matter of fact, my work is a lot of the work that functional medical doctors study, my initial work. So I'm like a medical doctor, but I use nutrition, I use homeopathy, vitamins, herbs, diet, things like this instead of drugs. That's essentially what a naturopathic doctor is. The word naturopath means nature cure, and naturopaths are the original doctors on this planet. Hippocrates, who's recognized as the father of medicine, Hippocrates is the one who coined the term naturopath, and it means nature cure. It's a totally different concept in medicine compared to orthodox medicine or your regular mainstream medicine. So naturopaths were you could think of it almost as your old country doctor who would make the house call, come to your house and give you different herbal medicines or whatever medicines were around at the time. Maybe they were homeopathy or whatever. And then we had a changeover in health care. The changeover occurred with a report called the Flexner Report, which was a report commissioned by, unfortunately, it was actually, to tell you the truth, the Rockefellers are the ones who ended up getting this report commissioned. And it was then looked at by the government, and then the Rockefellers paid a lot of people in the government under the table. And what the report said was that naturopathic medicine and homeopathic medicine were inferior. Now, homeopathic medicine is much more popular in England and Europe. You can go into just about any drugstore there and buy homeopathic medicines. You probably can now here in America, but it's much more popular in Europe. Matter of fact, the Queen of England has her own homeopathic doctor who's on call for her all the time. So the idea behind the Flexner Report was to get John D. Rockefeller's new drugs in the forefront of medical treatment and get rid of the homeopaths and get rid of the naturopaths that were using more natural treatments. Rockefeller found out that he could take coal tar, which was a waste product of his oil refinery, and he could synthesize the coal tar into things that were into the active ingredients, but they were synthetic versions, but still the active ingredients of of a lot of the medicines and herbs that were around then. So this is how the pharmaceutical industry was born. It goes back to the Flexner report and the Flexner Commission that came up with this report. And essentially, after this report came out, the naturopathic schools that had been the prevalent schools at the time dropped to only a handful, and regular medical schools became more popular because what the medical schools were teaching was how you use these new drugs from John D. Rockefeller.
Wow.
So, for those people who are like conspiracy theory people, this is how it all started. This is how the modern pharmaceutical industry that we have today started. It started with John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller had this coal tar that was a waste product from his oil refinery that they were just throwing out. But Rockefeller found out that he could take that coal tar and synthesize it into the active ingredients and most of the herbs that the herbal doctors were using, and he could patent them, which makes the difference. Because see, you can't patent an herb. An herb grows in the ground, it grows in your backyard, it grows on the highway, it grows everywhere, it grows in the woods. You can't patent that, but you can patent the active ingredient if you synthesize it and you give it whatever name you want to give it. So he had the market cornered very early, and this is where we come up to today, where you have pharmaceuticals, you have drugs, you have mainstream medicine that's called allopathic medicine. Allopathic medicine back in those days, well, you've heard of the word quack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where the word quack comes from is quinine, because prior to John D. Rockefeller coming up with these drugs, medical doctors of that breed used to give everyone quinine as a cure for everything, and it was thought to be a quack cure. So that's where the word quack comes from, the word quinine, that all the doctors gave everybody as like a cure for everything.
Yeah. That's very interesting. That's very interesting because, like, we live in a place, especially in our time, it's like, having these like mental medications are just the thing that everyone needs to take because everyone has something, no matter who they are, what they do. Even if you're really happy, you even get one, right? So I guess what led to your passion to, be a medical doctor and just really focus on that, the holistic and just that whole area,
Well,
right?
first thing I have to correct you. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a naturopathic doctor. That's
Okay.
different. That's different.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But what got me interested in it was essentially my father had cancer. He was dying of cancer, and I was asking the medical doctors, what about his diet? What about vitamins? What about all these things that I'm reading about? And they didn't answer, didn't want to answer. Basically, turned their back, said it was all baloney. But they did it with such an arrogance that I felt there was something about this I need to look at, because if they're so against this, there's got to be something to it. No, they just didn't casually brush it off and say, "Oh, there's really nothing to that." They were really vehemently against. Some of the doctors were vehemently against people taking vitamins or people looking at using herbs instead of drugs. So I said, "There's to myself, there's got to be something to this if they're so against it." So I started looking into it, and I started studying some of the earliest nutritionists at the time. With Carlton Fredericks was one. He had a radio show, I'm sorry, on in New York City, where he gave a lot of different advice to people about diet and about vitamins and whatnot. And there were a lot of people at that time just starting to come out that were giving you tremendous information on alternative things to standard medical treatments, and that's what got me interested. I saw that there was something there to learn that the group in charge was against. So I thought to myself, they've got to be against this for some reason. The only reason usually that is it's going to take business away from them, so it must work. There's got to be some aspects of it that work. So I looked into it to the degree where then I actually went back to school and became a naturopath. And from being a naturopath with that background, I was very easily able to then become certified as a clinical nutritionist, because that's a huge thing that naturopaths use, is diet and vitamins and nutritional nutraceuticals, we call them, or nutraceuticals,
Yeah.
instead of a
It's kind of
pharmaceutical.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because, I guess, we have a area where people are growing, expanding their business, and they want to do it the right way, but they kind of fall into this trap of like, oh, it must be my mental health aspect. That's why I can't do it. Do you actually think it's a mental thing that
No,
people go through?
that's a lot of baloney. No,
Baloney. Okay.
that's total baloney. If you were to listen to them and you would believe everything they say, they would have a pill for every thought or any problem you have, which is just nonsense. Man, my grandfather came to this country from Italy. He came in, and there was to a degree a reluctance amongst people at that time with Italian immigrants, just like there has been with Irish immigrants and everybody else. This man worked 2 jobs during the week and worked the whole weekend to support his family. And he didn't go running around saying, "I need a pill."
Yeah.
This whole thing, this Mama's Little Helper, this whole pill culture developed because they were able to convince people that there's better living through chemistry, which is a lot of nonsense. A pill's not going to solve your problems.
Right.
There are legitimately people who have imbalances with their neurotransmitters. That does happen, but compared to the amount of people who are on Prozac and drugs like that, it's way off the scale.
Right. So do you think that people should take a more natural path in terms of like how they take care of themselves? Like, what do you think is the right way to for people who obviously are on these type of things, right? What do
Mhm.
you think is the solution to, like, instead of doing these, like, what they should do?
Well, one of the solutions is to identify what the real problems are
Mm.
and identify if there really is a problem, or if you're just dubbing in that there is a problem, and then confronting the problem and handling it, and not resorting on a pill that's going to tranquilize you and drug you out, because you're not going to get anywhere that way.
Right. Because I think one of the things that people have a hard time with is just, especially, I'm 30, I just turned 30, and a lot of us are, not particularly me, but a lot of other people have the problem of, okay, I can't stay focused. I'm kind of like, I can only watch certain things and do certain things, and my mind kind of goes all over the place, right? So what do you think is like the appropriate thing they should do for you really handle that situation? Because maybe it's a mental thing, maybe it's a physical thing. One of either one. What do you think that would help?
There's a lot of if you go back 20, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of these problems didn't exist
Mm,
because people didn't have time to have them.
right. Not people have time to have them.
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that you have going on now are things that are invented by the pharmaceutical companies of the psychiatric profession in order to get people on drugs or therapy that didn't exist back then. If you look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s work, if you look at autism didn't exist 100 years ago. And one of the reasons why it didn't exist was because the environment wasn't so toxic. Autistic kids, as an example, are kids who have impaired detoxification pathways. Their bodies can't detoxify well, so that affects them neurologically. 100 years ago, you didn't have the toxins challenging those kids.
Mm,
When we test autistic kids nowadays, we very typically find they have very elevated tissue levels of copper and mercury and other toxic metals. 100 years ago, they weren't exposed to those metals in the same way, because where they're getting those metals from now are medications, vaccines, and the amalgam fillings. That we had a whole generation who were affected by the silver amalgam fillings that were in their mouth, because those fillings are made of a mercury, zinc, copper alloy. And after time, those fillings break down and those metals absorb into your body, and they affect you neurologically, and they can affect your thyroid gland. They can affect your intestinal tract. They can affect your immune system. They do various things. But you see, 100 years ago, kids weren't given these things. You didn't get all the vaccines. You didn't get fillings in your mouth, so they weren't neurologically challenged. They still had there still were people who had the same genetic errors that caused them not to be able to detoxify effectively, but they weren't bombarded with the toxins that we're getting hit with now.
right.
Robert F.
Yeah.
Kennedy Jr. is doing a great job of enlightening people, but he's just scratching the surface so far.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I'm like, people go through these things, but it's like, is it actually real? Is it actually not? Is it like actually mental aspect, or is it just like, because a lot of it did, like you mentioned, didn't exist 100 years ago. Like all these like just weird diseases that just came out, and it's just kind of wild that now they think they can fix it with a pill.
Well, that's the whole game.
Yeah.
In medicine, you're taught, that's kind of a joke in medical school. You're taught there are three things you can never do. First, you can never hurt the patient. Second, you never kill the patient. And third, you never cure the patient.
Mm,
Because if you cure him, you lose his business. If you kill him, you've lost his business. You obviously don't want to hurt him anyway. But the idea is you don't cure the patient, because then he's off your medication. The whole premise behind most pharmaceutical drugs is that you're on them forever. They're controlling your symptoms. They're not actually curing the problem. That's not what doctors are taught in school. Doctors are, with the exception of surgery, to do something to repair something that's broke, or to remove something that's grossly malfunctioning. You're not taught to cure anything. You're taught you're taught to just maintain a person's symptoms. That's what all pharmaceutical drugs are about.
It's almost in a way very evil because it's like you can't actually fix anything. You just, like you mentioned, you just maintain the symptoms.
Well, we can go further than that. There are different states in this country where it's actually illegal for you to say that you can cure certain diseases. Because between the AMA and the pharmaceutical industry, they have not determined, or they're not coming forward and saying you can actually cure this disease. And they don't want you to cure the disease, because if you could cure it, it means all these people would come off the medications that they're on.
Right. And they lose their money.
Right.
Wow. And so, like, for people who are, business owners in this area, like they help, handle certain problems. Like, what do you do with a lot of this? Because obviously we're, I guess, as doctors, as, chiropractors, anyone like that, as a business owner, also themselves, sometimes they fight this problem of like, okay, like it's actually more of a mental aspect, and the pharmaceutical companies are just, really focused on it's a mental problem, not a physical problem. Like, how do we do to fight? How do people fight that off?
Well, first of all, there's no evidence. Actually, you've probably heard this term before, that psychiatrists or doctors will say that there's a chemical imbalance.
I have of that.
Right. You've heard this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know there's actually no proof that this exists? There is not one medical study anywhere that has ever proven that anyone has this chemical imbalance that they throw around.
Wow.
And most people don't know that. Most people assume that there's a whole warehouse full of research studies that talk about this chemical imbalance that they continually talk about when they want to put someone on a psychiatric based medication. There is not one study that exists that ever proved there was any chemical imbalance in anyone's brain.
Wow. It's basically all a lie, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so wild to me, like just people what they would do just to keep themselves in business, or how they just alter people's minds and just think they're the authorities,
Well, there's a great video you can watch, which is called "The Marketing of Madness."
Oh yeah.
It's put out by cchr.org. If you go to their website, you can find a link for that and many other videos they have. But the Marketing of Madness is about 4 hours long, and it goes through the beginning of a lot of the things I just spoke about. We're right back to the beginning, and it goes and shows you how they market. Like, the Marketing of Madness is the actual subject matter. They show you how they market madness to convince people that they're mad, or they have a mental problem, so they'll go on these medications that make them billions of dollars.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure for everyone else it probably affects them greatly because they pay for it, basically, right?
Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing. And so, now I guess going to along the same line, but with business aspect, right? So, with business owners, like we have when people are saying like, I have a chemical imbalance, like I'm sure you've probably read that before, when they're kind of taught that way. Like, how do you help that?
There actually are tests that you can do to see how someone is functioning neurologically.
Mm-hmm.
We can test people's neurotransmitters. We can test them for toxicity that affects them neurologically. And if there's nothing wrong with their nervous system and they're fine, then this is something that's not physical. This is something that's perhaps a lack of education, or a personality quirk or something they have, but it's not pathology. It's nothing. It's not a disease. You see.
Right. Yeah,
So
it definitely is. I definitely know that for sure.
What a person may want to do is get a business consultant, or take business courses or something, or look for words that they don't understand correctly, that are misunderstood in the field that they're studying.
Right.
And handle that aspect. Really don't understand what they're studying, be expert at it, as opposed to looking for physical reasons that don't exist.
Right. And so from a business aspect, what do you think is, how should CEOs and founders, like obviously they run their own business and they're always stressed out and all that other stuff like that. Obviously we know you and I know that it's not a mental aspect possibly, right? But it's also maybe something going on in that area. Like, what do you suggest? Because you obviously always own your own, I would think your own practice, right?
Yeah, well, I would recommend for the person to get a checkup, see if there's anything wrong with them, because there can be things going on. A person can have thyroid problems, they could have adrenal gland problems. There are numerous things that somebody could have going on that could affect them, like something that you would align to as chronic fatigue syndrome that could affect the person. So a person wants to make sure that they physically are sound. And if they're physically sound, then they have to pay attention to what it is they're studying from that aspect of it, and not be assuming everything is physical and there's a pill for everything.
Right. Right. And so, and I guess, going back to as a business, right? Like, what do you, in terms of how you run your own company and your own business and your own practice, right?
Hmm.
So, and a lot of people who are listening, they're also, some of them are doctors, some of them are practitioners of their own thing. And so how do you resolve like, if it's not mental, right? How do they run and how do they actually run a practice like yours? Like, how does that help? Like, just from an educational standpoint, how can we help these people to kind of understand, like, how do I run a company without feeling like
Well,
overwhelmed?
just about in every profession, they have consultants and there's software. And the combination of having the right software to manage your practice and having consultants to teach you how the organization should be set up. Like, for instance, to have an organizational board that shows all the departments and divisions of your organization and what each person's job should be in there. Those are the things a person should look for.
Right.
That
And
teaches them
so,
how to organize and run it.
yeah. And this is how you run your practice, is really just like making departments and making divisional
Hmm.
type things with that.
Yep,
Interesting.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
We use
And
something that's called an organization board that shows you all the different departments and, well, the divisions and then the departments within the divisions, and it shows you how everything works from the time the person first enters your door to the time where they're finished with your service and they're on their way out. You go through the whole organization, shows you everything that should be happening, who should be doing it, how it should be done, and it makes it's not called an organizational board for nothing. I mean, it makes it very easy when you have this concept and you know what should be happening, because otherwise you can just be running around amok not knowing what you're doing.
yeah. Is there like mistakes you've seen? Like, with, I don't know, you probably spoken to a lot of other doctors or other people in the field of practice, right? Have you seen, like, what are some common mistakes people run into that they should do instead?
I can't really say that that's happening anymore, because
Mm,
in the chiropractic profession, in many of the professions, there are so many consultants out there that will come in and organize your practice for you, that or at least set up an organization for you then to step into and then to run. But
mm.
I can't say I come across that anymore.
Interesting. And I guess for people, a great knowledge for them is like, because I know for a lot of people who are, doctors or who are they have their own practice in chiropractic, that, they obviously go to school to learn their practice, but they never actually went to school for business, right? So they don't really have a concept on how to run a business or how to grow and expand their own practice, right? Is there a
Usually,
way yeah,
usually
go ahead.
when they get out of school, usually they'll get hooked up with a consulting firm
Mhm.
that will come in and set up their practice. So look at what the existing practice is, and then it will reorganize it into what the optimal practice would be and show them all the steps that they have to go through.
Yeah. It's very interesting, what you mentioned about the mental, the physical aspects, but also, just in the business aspect, because, a lot of people are just not really, I find a lot of people that I've met who just starting their own practice are not super equipped in understanding what is kind of happening in the business, right? So you've obviously you've done practices for a number of years, right? So like you've experienced a lot of things,
Hmm.
with people and how they interact with their clients or how they interact with their staff, in terms of your staff. Like, how do you, you know, as a business owner yourself, how do you actually handle and educate your staff to how the organization operates?
Well, we very early on put together a book for staff members
Mm,
that explained every job there was that someone could have in the practice and
mm,
how you do that job. It would be thought of as like from the old times in the railroad industry. It would be called hatting. What hat the person's wearing. That the conductor of the train wears a hat, the engineer wears a hat, And in your business, everybody wears a hat, and everyone has to have have instructions for that hat, so the person knows what their hat is. What is the product of your hat? What is your hat supposed to do? What's it supposed to do for the practice, or what is its valuable product? And then you go about how it is that you reach that point. What are the actions that you take to perform your job correctly, so you have this valuable product at the end as an end result? And then that becomes your statistic, which becomes measured. And that measuring that shows your efficiency.
Right.
And this is what
Wow.
we did, and this is what most people do nowadays. And this is what the job of the consultants is to come in and set up your practice in that manner.
Awesome. And so for you, I'd love to also hear some successes you've had in your practice or anything that you did in terms of, you've talked about, the healing of the body and like you've helped probably, I'm sure, a lot of people in those areas. I would love to hear a success story from you on like someone you've helped. You don't have to give me the name, but I'd love to just hear a success from you on that.
Well, we've turned 46 people HIV negative who were HIV positive.
Wow.
That's one of the greatest things that we've done. The problem is keeping them that way, is what we discovered. The material on how to do that we discovered from a doctor. She's a doctor of science, and she was also a pathologist. Her name was Dr. Hulda Clark, and she wrote a book about the cure for HIV. And we actually did precisely what she had in the book, and it ended up turning 46 people HIV. It was a very high percentage of the people, because the amount of people we ran through that program was maybe about 60, and out of the 60, the majority of them went HIV negative. The problem is keeping them that way, because unfortunately sometimes they would get reinfected again, and that's not a medical issue. That's more of a lifestyle issue, in terms of practicing safe sex and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
but I feel that was a major accomplishment. Also discovering how you treat and properly handle candidiasis, which is what my book is about. My book is called The Candida Chronicles, which explains the proper way to treat Candida, which is Candida is a fungal overgrowth that you can have. Women will know it as vaginal yeast infections, but it's actually a fungal overgrowth that occurs in your intestines, and it's very hard. It's very hard to treat because the Candida, as a microorganism, mutates very easily, and when you use drugs to kill it, it very easily becomes drug resistive.
Wow.
So there's very particular ways that you need to go about treating it, so that you don't end up having it forever and it doesn't evolve into much more complicated problems. Like Candida can start out giving you digestive problems or a vaginal yeast infection, and eventually it could end up causing you cancer.
Wow.
So
That sounds intense. Yeah, I could definitely see that you've probably helped a lot of people with that. That's pretty amazing, actually.
about 30% of the U.S. population at any time probably has Candida.
Wow. And it's amazing that you found a solution, or you've really gotten to a point where like I know the solution to handle that. So I think that's really impressive. Especially, a lot of people can't communicate very well, or they're like kind of like, oh, we can help you with this, but we can't actually cure it. You know what I mean? So is that always a problem that trying to say you cure it, or is it more just
Well,
like putting it under control?
we don't say that we cure it, because legally you can. Between me, you, and us girls, we can say that we do, but what we really do is correct the biome, the intestinal biome. There's no law that exists that says you can't say you can rebalance someone's intestinal biome. The biome is the flora of your intestinal tract. It's the combination of all the good organisms that live there and all the bad ones. In your intestines, you have about 5 to 10 pounds of bacteria and different microorganisms that live there. That's normal. Some of them are good organisms, like the probiotics you hear about, and some of them are the bad ones, which is like what Candida is. So we
Wow.
rebalance that, and there is no law that says you can't do that. That's not necessarily curing. That's not looked at as curing any disease, even though it ends up ultimately being so. But it's not really looked at that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, amazing. I really appreciate the time you've given us and asking a lot of these questions about, especially the mental health aspect and the physical aspect of things. I really appreciate it, what you kind of done, but also educating everyone on this, especially people who are listening to this. I really appreciate the time you've given us for that.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. So I guess before we end off, I'd love for people to reach out to you and kind of communicate what, a little bit about yourself. Maybe you want to talk to you personally. Where's the best place to reach out to you?
They can reach me at any of my on social media, obviously, but they can also reach me on my websites. I have three. The main one is called health-truth.com. And I have two other websites, the New York City Candida Doctor and the New York City Thyroid Doctor.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the time you've given us. And of course, I thank everyone here for listening to this channel. If you guys like this stuff, definitely check out Dr. Michael Biamonte. I think you'll love him. And of course, thank you for joining the show. And Michael, I was honored to have you on my show, man.
You're welcome, Josh.